What happened after you turned the chair over? Tom Robinson had come to a dead stop, and he glanced at Atticus and then the jury. Tom, you're sworn to tell the whole truth. Tom ran his hand nervously over his mouth. What happened after that? Answer the question. Mr. Finch, I got down off the chair and turned around, and she sort of jumped on me. Jumped on you violently? No, sir, she hugged me. She hugged me around the waist. This time Judge Taylor's gavel came down with a bang, and as he did, the overhead lights went on in the courtroom. Then what'd she do? The witness swallowed. She reached up and kissed me side of the face. She says she never kissed a grown man before, and she might as well kiss me. She says what her papa do to her don't count. She says, kiss me back, and I say, Miss Mayella, let me out of here, and tried to run, but she got back to the door, and I'd had to push her, and I didn't want to harm her, Mr. Finch, and I say, let me pass, but just when I say it, Mr. Yule yonder hollered through the window. What did he say? Something not fitting to say, not fitting for these folks and children to hear. What did he say, Tom? You must tell the jury what he said. He says, I'm not going to read it, but I'll kill you. Then what happened? Mr. Finch, I was running so fast I didn't know what happened. Tom, did you rape Mayella Yule? I did not, sir. Did you harm her in any way? I did not, sir. Did you resist her advances? Mr. Finch, I tried to without being ugly to her. I didn't want to be ugly. I didn't want to push her or nothing. It occurred to me in their own way that Tom Robinson's manners were as good as Atticus's. Until my father explained it to me later, I didn't understand the subtlety of his predicament. He would not have dared to strike a white woman under any circumstance except to expect to live long. So he took the first opportunity to run, a sure sign of guilt. Tom, go back once more to Mr. Yule. Did he say anything to you? Nothing, sir. He might have said something, but I weren't there. That'll do, said Atticus. What did you hear? Who was he talking to? Mr. Finch, he were talking and looking at Miss Mayella. Then you ran? I sure did, sir. Why did you run? I was scared, sir. Why were you scared? Mr. Finch, if you was a guy like me, you'd be scared too. Atticus sat down. I just want the whole lot of you to know one thing, said Mr. Linkdees. The boy worked for me 8 years, and I ain't had a speck of trouble out of him, not a speck. Shut your mouth, sir, Judge Taylor said. Linkdees, if you have anything to say, you can say it under oath at the proper time, but until then you get out of this room. You hear me? Get out of this room, sir, you hear me? Judge Taylor looked daggers at Atticus as if daring him to speak, but Atticus ducked his head and was laughing into his lap. I remember something he said about Judge Taylor's ex-cathedra remarks sometimes exceeding his duty, but the few lawyers ever did anything about them. And I looked at Jem, and Jem shook his head. It ain't like one of the jurymen to get up and start talking. I think it'd be different then. Mr. Link were just disturbing the peace or something. Then he said, Go ahead, Mr. Gilmer. You were given 30 days once for disorderly conduct, Robinson, asked Mr. Gilmer. Yes, sir. What'd the guy look like when you got through with him? Well, he beat me, Mr. Gilmer. Yes, but you were convicted, weren't you? It was a misdemeanor, and it's in the record, Judge. I thought Atticus sounded tired. Witness will answer, though. Yes, sir. I got 30 days. I knew Mr. Gilmer would certainly tell the jury that anyone who was convicted of disorderly conduct could easily have had it in his heart to take advantage of Miss Mayella. Robinson, you're pretty good at busting up shift robes and kindling them with one hand, aren't you? Yes, sir. Strong enough to choke the breath out of a woman and sling her to the floor. I never done that, sir. But you are strong enough to. I reckon so, sir. Had your eye on her a long time, hadn't you, boy? No, sir, I never looked at her. Then you were mighty polite to do all that chopping and hauling for her, weren't you, boy? I was just trying to help her out, sir. That was mighty generous of you. You had chores at home after your regular work, didn't you? Yes, sir. Why didn't you do them instead of Miss Yule's? Done 'em both, sir. You must have been pretty busy. Why? Why what? Why were you so anxious to do that woman's chores? Looked like she didn't have nobody to help her, like I says. With Mr. Yule and 7 children on the place, boy? Well, I says it looked like they never helped her none. You did all this chopping and work from sheer goodness, boy. I tried to help her, I says. Notice how he keeps calling him boy. That's just very disrespectful. So Mr. Gilmer smiled. You're a mighty good fellow, it seems. Did all this for not 1 penny? Yes, sir, I felt sorry for her. She seemed to try more than the rest of 'em. You felt sorry for her? You felt sorry for... Mr. Gilmer seemed ready to rise to his ceiling. Mr. Gilmer paused a long time. Now, you went by the house as usual last November, and she asked you to come in and bust up a shift rope. No, sir. Did you deny that you went by the house? No. She said she had something for me to do in the house. She says she asked you to bust a shift rope. Is that right? No, sir, it ain't. When you say she's lying, boy, I don't say she's lying, Mr. Gilmer. I say she's mistaken in her mind. To the next 10 questions, Mr. Gilmer reviewed her reverse vision of the events. Didn't Mr. Yule run you off the place? No, sir, I don't think he did. You don't think? What do you mean? I mean, I didn't stay long enough for him to run me off. You're very candid about this. Why did you run so fast? I says I was scared. If you had a clear conscience, why were you scared? Like I says before, if it weren't safe for Anne to be in a fix like that. But you weren't in a fix. You testified that you were resisting Miss Yule. You were so scared that she'd hurt you, you ran, a big buck like you. No, sir. I was scared I'd be in court, just like I am now. Scared of arrest, scared you'd have to face up to what you did. No, sir. Scared I'd have to face up to what I didn't do. Are you being impudent to me? No, sir. I didn't go to be. This is as much as I had heard because Jim made me take Dill out. Dill had started crying, and he couldn't stop. Quietly at first, but his sobs were heard, and several people in the balcony noticed. Aren't you feeling good? I asked. Anything happened, Scout? Asked Mr. Linkdees. No, sir, I answered. Dill here, he's sick. Come on out under the trees. Heat got you, I expect. It was just him I couldn't stand, Dill said. Who, Tom? That old Mr. Gilmer doing him that way, talking to him so hateful. Dill, that's his job. If we didn't have prosecutors, we wouldn't have defense attorneys, I reckon. I know all that, Scout. It was the way he said it made me plain sick. He's supposed to act that way. Dill, he was cross. He didn't act that way when... Dill, those were his own witnesses. Well, Mr. Finch didn't act that way to Mayella, and the old man Yule when he cross-examined them. Well, Dill, after all, he's just a... I don't care one speck. It ain't right. Somehow it ain't right to do him that way. Hasn't anybody got any business talking like that? It just makes me sick. That's just Mr. Gilmer's way, Dill. Well, today Mr. Gilmer seemed to me like he was half trying, and then they do him all that way, most lawyers. I mean, Mr. Finch doesn't. He's not an example, Dill. He's the same in the courtroom as he is in the public streets. I know what you mean, said a voice behind us. We thought it came from a tree trunk, but it belonged to Mr. Adolphus Raymond. You aren't thin-hided. It just makes you sick, doesn't it? Come around here, son. I got something that'll settle your stomach. Here. He offered Dill his paper sack. Take a good sip, and it'll quiet you. So as we conclude the chapter, I think it's clear that only the children are starting to understand the significance of what happened, and they're not willing, they're not able to do anything about it because the adults and the entire town are blinded by their prejudice. It plays into that theme of childhood. It plays into maturity, that as they learn and they grow to see the evil in the world, it's disheartening, and it causes them to become cynical and depressed and distrusting of adults. And so we're going to, this continues to talk about it, and then it moves into the final scene, which is with Atticus's testimony, which I had you watch in a different video. So that concludes, for our purposes, the court scene. And so we'll pick up next week and we'll talk about the after effects or the complications of that. And so, for instance, just kind of a precursor to that, Jem is crying, his face is streaked with angry tears. It isn't right. And we see that the children are going to come and cause a stir at what ends up happening. So bear in mind that this is a lot of reading, but it's good and it's important. So keep pressing on.